The biggest thing then was probably going to Iraq, a job known as Khark, which was basically a complete new water treatment works and pumping station distribution mains for the eastern side of the city of Baghdad. The total output would have been just over 18,000 litres a second of pure drinking water, obviously commissioned in a series of stages. And I was appointed as Chief Commissioning Engineer for the project, which involved 6 pumping stations spread quite a long way around Baghdad. And the intake station was north of Baghdad, and a place called Tarmiya, where the water was taken from the River Tigris and treated and brought up to a very high standard, and then pumped the 40 kilometres into a station called North Reservoir. The people, generally speaking, were actually quite friendly. There were one or two who weren't, but generally speaking, most people accepted the British way of getting on and doing things. Obviously, in a country like that where the whole ethos is different than it is in this country, very different, you had to pull every diplomatic stop out that you could, so that you didn't offend people. For example, you wouldn't be allowed to sit with your feet up like that, because it was deemed to be quite disrespectful to show anybody the bottom of your feet. In the mornings, they would offer you a cup of chai, which is tea without milk, but with lots of sugar. You would never start talking about work. You would always engage in some social chit-chat, and you would allow the customer to mention work first. But once he'd mentioned work, that was deemed to be the okay for talking about work. And generally speaking, yes, we got on pretty well. But at the end of my first 3 months, we had just reached the situation where the temperature reaches 50 centigrade, which is quite a shock for someone coming out from the UK. The only slight relief you get is that it's very dry, so that any perspiration that you produce by the bucket load does actually work for cooling you down. I think after a few weeks of temperature approaching 50, that you do get used to it, and I think I can work now in temperatures of up to 45 for a period of about 2 hours at a time. But once it gets above that, work becomes very difficult and very trying. And initially, we were working outside. Well, it's very dusty, and it's extremely hot, so hot that you have to wear gloves to protect your hands from touching valve handles and all the metal pieces of equipment. You'd simply burn yourself. After about 9:30 or so in the morning, you cannot touch anything that's metallic if it's been outside. We did have, the main equipment was in fact in the buildings, and apart from the intake pumps, most of them were in the basement of buildings, so the temperature was probably only about 35 or so. The grand opening obviously been arranged well in advance. Some very large tents erected on the site. This was held at the what we call the headworks, which was the intake and the main treatment plant. And I think I'm right in saying I'd worked the night shift the night before, and was required to attend all day during the opening. First, to ensure that the mayor of Baghdad pushed the right button in the pumping station, and that the people, I think there were 6 if memory turns is correct, we had 6 pumps ready to fire off. The fact that there were 14 in the station did cause a bit of confusion, but the treatment plant at that time was only capable of dealing with the output from 6 of the pumps, so we had to restrict the numbers to 6, and this caused a bit of consternation amongst the locals, and we had to actually show them which button to push, because nobody came through and did a dummy run as you might do in this country. TV crews, of course, falling all over the place, and we had to start a ceremonial fountain when the opening tape was cut.
Is it an Alan fountain?
No, it was something that we built up for the locals just to give a show. It was a small submersible pump hidden under a huge pile of stones. All looked quite pretty in the end. I then had to dash from one station to the next to make sure everything was going okay there, because my deputy, who was there at the time, I think he'd also worked the night before as well, and he was not quite so confident that everything would go quite so smoothly, but in the end it all went fairly well. No, there was an entry in the paper, and I have a copy of the Baghdad Observer, which is printed in English, and on about the 6th page there was a small paragraph saying that the new stations were inaugurated on this particular day, which was one of the anniversaries of one of the revolutions. I think it was the 31st of July. And that the whole place had been designed by the Iraqis and built by the Iraqis and operated by the Iraqis, which unfortunately wasn't quite true. Been designed by British consultants. All of the contracts were either British or Indian, and there were 3,500 Indians on site to build the place, plus 2,000 Chinese, and the whole lot was commissioned by British guys and operated by British guys.